The third Democratic debate for the 2020 election, hosted by ABC and Univision, featured 10 of the top Democratic primary contenders. A definitive moment for many candidates, the evening was full of surprises. Predictions that Warren would maul Biden, that Harris would stage an aggressive comeback, or that Beto O'Rourke would fade into the background all proved faulty. Compared to previous debates, this one featured far fewer moments of definitive victory and defeat, but no shortage of aggression and drama. In this video, I'll highlight some of the biggest moments, inspect some of the more egregious distortions, and attempt to separate the winners from the losers, with this question in mind: how will this affect the election? While the ABC debate marked the first time that all the biggest candidates appeared on stage together, the 10 candidates who made it were not technically the top 10 by some measures. RCP's polling averages actually rank Tulsi Gabbard, who was not invited, in 9th place, and have Julian Castro, who was included, in the 11th slot.
In many ways, I shouldn't be here on this stage,
Although in many ways we were lucky to have him appear, as he made for some of the most entertaining moments in the 3-hour debate. He even set off one moment involving several candidates which perfectly encapsulated much of what happened throughout the debate. It began with Castro's most aggressive attack on Biden, which I'll break down in a minute. Joe Biden stood there shaking his head and smiling when the moderators finally called on Andrew Yang to speak.
Andrew Yang.
Yang was visibly irritated by the negative atmosphere, but of course did not get a chance to speak before being interrupted.
This is why presidential debates are becoming unwatchable. This reminds everybody of what they cannot stand about Washington.
Buttigieg then rolled into a grand speech about Washington politics, divisiveness, and civility.
Scoring points against each other, poking at each other, and telling each other that you're my plan, your plan. Look.
But God love him, Castro did not let the mayor get away with that.
We all
that's called a Democratic primary election.
That's
called an election. That's an election. This is what we're here for. It's an election.
This really risked making Castro look like a jerk, defending aggression and infighting, but he seemed to win over the crowd. Then the moderators called on Yang again, but of course, Amy Klobuchar had to throw in a cliche.
Yeah, but a house divided cannot stand.
Now, Castro kicked off the debate with the first opening statement, and in 2 seconds proved one of my predictions to be true. He spoke Spanish, leading the other Spanish-speaking candidates to prove their skills as well.
Good evening, y bienvenidos a Texas. Welcome to Texas.
Este es racismo y es sencillo.
First of all, I want to say no. Actually, I want to translate that into Spanish. No.
Estoy seguro que toda esta mesa y todos los latinoamericanos seamos respetados hoy y mañana.
Okay, one of those might be fake. Cory Booker translating a single word was probably a wise choice here. He didn't bite off more than he could chew. Castro had perhaps his best moment of the debate at the end of the evening, when he explained how when he was first working in government on city council, he actually had to keep his job as a lawyer to pay the bills. But he faced a moral dilemma when his law job would have prevented him from voting the right way in city council.
On the one hand, I wanted to do the right thing. On the other hand, my livelihood, my student loans, my new house payment, my car payment depended on me shutting up, being conflicted out.
Now this may shock and surprise you, but in that story that Julian decided to tell on stage, he ended up doing the right thing.
So one day I walked into my law firm and I quit my job. And then I went and I voted against that land deal on the city council.
This story actually might have done Castro plenty of good. It sells him as a politician with integrity. But I would be surprised if anyone remembered anything about his performance that didn't involve his aggressive attacks on Joe Biden. The most viral worthy of these was his clash about what Joe Biden had said 2 minutes ago.
I want every single American family to have a strong Medicare plan available. You require them to opt in, and I would not require them to opt in. They would automatically be enrolled. My plan would do that. Your plan would not.
They do not have to buy in. They do not have to buy in.
You just said that. You just said that 2 minutes ago. You just said 2 minutes ago that they would have to buy in. You said they would have to buy in. Are you forgetting what you said 2 minutes ago? Are you forgetting already said just 2 minutes ago? I mean, I can't believe that you said 2 minutes ago that they had to buy in, and now you're saying they don't have to buy. You're forgetting that.
Drums.
If you lose your job, for instance, his health care plan would not automatically enroll you. You would have to opt in. My health care plan would. That's a big difference.
It's actually a pretty small difference. They're both for a public option.
I'm fulfilling the legacy of Barack Obama, and you're not.
Now, moments after the debate concluded, ABC News tried to fact-check Castro's claim about Biden forgetting what he said 2 minutes ago.
I looked back at the transcript here, and it looks to me like Julian Castro was just flatly wrong. The question was whether or not somebody would have to buy into Medicare under his plan if they couldn't afford it.
You see what they just snuck in there? If they couldn't afford it. That's a key piece of information that completely changes the debate. But recall, Castro opened up that clash with Biden talking about American families in general.
I want every single American family.
Not just the ones who can't afford it.
And here's what Biden said less than 2 minutes earlier. You'll be able to buy in. Anyone who can't afford gets automatically enrolled in the Medicare-typed option.
Here's Castro's interpretation of that same transcript.
So what he said in the transcript was that if you lose your job, that you could automatically buy in to his plan. You need to catch the distinction here.
Right.
When he says you can automatically buy in, there is no automatic about it.
Castro's actually right about that. Biden said automatically plenty of times when he was speaking about healthcare. But he was saying you'll automatically qualify to buy in, not be automatically enrolled as Castro's plan does.
If you want Medicare, if you lose the job from your insurance from your employer, you automatically can buy into this. You don't have no pre-existing condition can stop you from buying in. You get covered. Every single person who is diagnosed with cancer or any other disease can automatically become part of this plan. They will not go bankrupt because of that.
But forget what they were saying on stage. The real question is, does Biden's plan have an automatic enrollment or not? Well, if you go by the ABC framing of it, if you can't afford it, then yes, his plan will automatically enroll some low-income people. On the healthcare page of his website, Biden explains that he would automatically enroll individuals making below 138% of the federal poverty line when they interact with institutions like public schools or the SNAP program, if they aren't already covered by Medicaid. These individuals are being automatically enrolled into a public option to make up for the fact that 14 states have refused to enact the ACA's expansion of Medicaid. But that is the only time his plan talks about automatic enrollment. So for everyone else, like someone losing their job, there does not appear to be an automatic enrollment. There's no automatic enrollment of the middle class, for instance, or for those already on Medicaid. So Castro seems to have been largely right about there being a distinction between his plan and Biden's when it comes to the issue of automatic enrollment. But of course that won't change the way that ABC covered the issue on the night of the debate, or how Castro appeared in the moment. ABC and other mainstream media networks have also repeatedly claimed that Castro's attack about Biden forgetting was a jab at his age. And Castro's aggression over the point didn't help to make him look good. Again and again, Castro seemed to come off as the heel of the debate. While this will certainly boost his name recognition, it will probably also downgrade his favorability. He'll probably gain some supporters and lose others. That might even mean an overall boost in the polls, but certainly not one large enough to make him anything like a major contender. I personally really enjoyed Castro's performance, but I would expect it's not going to gain him the kind of traction he was hoping for. This was a narrow loss for Castro. Of course, just because the crossfire may have ended up hurting Castro does not mean that it will end up helping the guy it was aimed at. Joe Biden seems to have taken damage a number of times in battles involving both Castro and a tough question coming from the moderators. One example was this question from Jorge Ramos about his views on border walls and Obama's deportations.
In 2008, you supported the border wall, saying, unlike most Democrats, I voted for 700 miles of fence. This is what you said.
Just look at Biden's face here. He does not exactly look confident or happy or strong.
Then you served as vice president in an administration that deported 3 million people, the most ever in U.S. history. Are you prepared to say tonight that you and President Obama made a mistake about deportations. Why should Latinos trust you?
Biden did not answer this question. Recall, he's being asked about supporting border walls and Obama's deportations. In his response, Biden talked about how it's bad to compare Obama and Trump on immigration issues.
Comparing this president to the president we have is outrageous.
He talked about the DACA program.
With the DACA program, no one had ever done that before.
Refugee policy.
All those people are seeking asylum. They deserve to be heard.
And for some reason, the Violence Against Women Act.
The 25th anniversary of the Violence Against Women Act is up. Let's put pressure on them to pass the Violence Against Women Act now. But then we'll go back.
You didn't answer the question.
Well,
the question
I did
did you make
No, you didn't.
Did you make a mistake with those deportations?
The president did the best thing that was able to be done at the time.
How about you?
I'm the Vice President of the United States.
Okay, skipping past the fact that it's weird he put this in present tense, we saw this same line of argument coming from him in the last debates, and Booker called him out on it, to great effect. So it should not have surprised him that Castro would come after him with the same complaint.
He wants to take credit for Obama's work, but not have to answer to any questions.
Then Biden struck back with what I take to be an even worse statement.
I stand with Barack Obama all 8 years, good, bad, and indifferent. That's where I stand.
Okay, so he's actually saying that he stands with Obama even on the bad things. I know that he's trying to convey loyalty here, but that is a plainly ignorant thing to say. You shouldn't stand with yourself on the bad things. You should learn from your mistakes. At any rate, Biden found himself in trouble again when he was asked another tough question from a moderator.
I want to come to you and talk to you about inequality in schools and race.
That response tells it all. Biden, who is now facing tough questions, seems to think it's unfair.
A conversation about how to deal with segregation in schools back in 1975, you told a reporter, I don't feel responsible for the sins of my father and grandfather. I feel responsible for what the situation is today, for the sins of my own generation, and I'll be damned if I feel responsible to pay for what happened 300 years ago.
That is a tough setup. That quote does make him sound terrible. So here's the question.
What responsibility do you think that Americans need to take to repair the legacy of slavery in our country?
Now, Biden's response to this actually started well enough.
Well, they have to deal with look, there is institutional segregation in this country. And from the time I got involved, I started dealing with that.
But then it got pretty weird.
Play the radio. Make sure the television, make sure you have the record player on at night, the phone. Make sure the kids hear words.
Yep, make sure the kids hear words. Recall, he's attempting to answer a question here about race.
There's so much No, I'm going to go like the rest of them do, twice over, okay?
Good applause line there, but I don't know why he wants to keep going.
The deal is that we've got this a little backwards. And by the way, in Venezuela, we should be allowing people to come here from Venezuela. I know Maduro. I've confronted Maduro.
Seriously, I know politicians try to answer the questions they want to answer, not the questions they were asked. But in a response to a question about race, Biden started talking about having children listen to records before talking about Venezuela and Maduro. Then he ends it with a pinch of unhinged aggression.
To see to it those three countries, in fact, change their system so people don't have a chance to leave. You're all acting like we just discovered this yesterday.
Thank you, Mr. Vice President. Secretary Castro.
And now Castro gets a chance to dunk on Biden once again.
Thank you very much. Well, that's quite a lot.
Getting off track seemed to be a reoccurring theme for Biden throughout the debate. In fact, his opening statement seemed pretty off track from his central campaign message of restoring civility and returning to normal. Now he made it clear his message would be refusing to postpone.
Well, I refuse to postpone one more minute spending billions of dollars on curing cancer. I refuse to postpone giving every single child in America pre-K all the way through high school. I refuse to postpone any longer taking on climate change.
Okay, so this is kind of bizarre messaging from a moderate candidate whose main advantages are familiarity and experience. He's apparently trying to shift gears from let's everybody just calm down to the urgency of now. For me, this just doesn't track. How can you be a revolutionary moderate, radically in the middle? Despite this urgency argument on healthcare, what we got from Biden were his greatest hits. Medicare for all is too expensive.
My plan for healthcare costs a lot of money. It costs $740 billion. It doesn't cost $30 trillion.
Conflating deductibles with taxes.
There will be a deductible in your paycheck.
And of course, calling whoever is standing immediately to his left the President of the United States of America.
Nobody's yet said how much it's going to cost the taxpayer. I hear this large savings. The president my friend from Vermont thinks that.
President Sanders also created another opportunity for Biden to flub something when he brought up Canada.
In the United States of America, we are spending twice as much per capita on health care as the Canadians or any other major country on earth.
This is America.
Yeah, but Americans don't want to pay twice as much.
The implication there seemed to be that America can't do what Canada and other countries can do. Now, I myself prefer the Joe Biden who believes America can do anything.
Look, this is the United States of America. There's never been a single solitary time when we've set our mind to something we've been unable to do it.
Except, of course, matching the healthcare costs and outcomes of a country with 10% of the population of the United States spread over a giant frozen wasteland of always winter. Another repetition for Biden was what I think was a great argument for him from the last debate, that the United States needs to create a more inclusive version of the TPP to prevent China from dominating global trade.
We're either going to make the policy or China's going to make the rules of the road. We make up 25% of the world economy. We need another 25% to join us. At the table has to be labor, and at the table have to be environmentalists.
Overall, though, the only new stuff we got from Biden were weird moments. In general, Biden seemed to have a lot of energy and sufficient strength throughout the debate, but he also seemed to lose his train of thought and fumbled the ball a number of times. As the frontrunner, his modest target to pull out a win for this debate is to not take any damage. He fell short of that, in my view. This was a loss for the vice president. Biden having a rough night, of course, is good news for the progressive candidates nipping at his heels. This debate might have been a boon for Bernie Sanders, but it became clear the moment he began speaking that he was going to have a tough time.
Let me be blunt and tell you what you don't hear much about in Congress or in the media.
Bernie's apparent laryngitis was a horrible problem for the senator from Vermont. His hoarse voice may have contributed to the fact that despite polling in second to third place, he was third from the bottom in terms of total speaking time. It also made him sound tired, which does not exactly play well in a mainstream media landscape where Sanders is constantly facing criticism over his age. Now, don't get me wrong. Despite the sore throat, Sanders presented a ton of energy and power throughout the night, like in this attack against Biden's healthcare proposal.
You got to defend the fact that today, not only do we have 87 million people uninsured and underinsured, you got to defend the fact that 500,000 Americans are going bankrupt. Under my legislation, people will not go into financial ruin because they suffered with a diagnosis of cancer.
Or in this defense against Biden's complaint about the cost of Sanders' proposal.
Joe said that Medicare for all will cost over $30 trillion. That's right, Joe. Status quo over 10 years will be $50 trillion.
And he took a victory lap on his famous catchphrase from debate 2.
I, who wrote the damn bill, if I may say so.
Bernie also did a good job of distinguishing his record from that of Joe Biden. In one place on trade,
Joe and I strongly disagree on trade. I helped lead the opposition to NAFTA and PNTR, which cost this country over 4 million good-paying jobs.
In another on Iraq and the surge, criticizing Biden's defense that he trusted the Bush administration.
Talked about the big mistake in Iraq and the surge. The truth is, the big mistake, the huge mistake, and one of the big differences between you and me, I never believed what Cheney and Bush said about Iraq.
You're right.
I voted against the war in Iraq and helped lead the opposition. I mean, I kind of had the feeling that there would be massive destabilization in that area if we went into that war.
He also worked in a sorely needed distinction between himself and Elizabeth Warren.
But I think also I am the only person up here to have voted against all 3 of Trump's military budgets.
Keeping with foreign policy, Bernie was also asked about Venezuela and why he refused to call Maduro a dictator.
You admit that Venezuela does not have free elections, but still you refuse to call Nicolás Maduro un dictador, a dictator.
Well, first of all, let me be very clear. Anybody who does what Maduro does is a vicious tyrant.
Well, that puts that one to bed. Bernie also had a strong answer to the last question of the night about personal traits and resilience.
Resilience, to me, means growing up in a rent-controlled apartment in Brooklyn, New York, the son of an immigrant who came to this country without a nickel in his pocket.
So, that's a lot of great moments for Bernie Sanders. Unfortunately, all of his great work is undermined by his voice. Anytime someone plays a clip of him from this debate, the audience will hear his hoarse, tired-sounding voice. It implicitly raises a question over whether Bernie would be able to run a vigorous campaign against Trump. That's really not fair, but it is what it is. Despite saying all the right things, Bernie said it in a voice that I don't think will help him with the general public. So this one superficial problem will likely make the night a loss for Bernie Sanders. Now, one of the strongest lines of attack against Bernie Sanders came from a fairly unlikely source, the typically non-confrontational Amy Klobuchar.
And while Bernie wrote the bill, I read the bill.
That was an effective line for Klobuchar, one that signals guilt for Bernie Sanders even before she actually gets into the details.
And on page 8 of the bill.
That too, referring to a specific page, makes it sound like there's some scary thing hidden in the legislation that no one is intended to read.
It says that we will no longer have private insurance as we know it. And that means that 149 million Americans will no longer be able to have their current insurance. That's in 4 years. I don't think that's a bold idea. I think it's a bad idea.
Having already built up a boogeyman, Klobuchar then accurately represents what even advocates of Bernie's bill freely admit, that the legislation gets rid of most private plans. What she doesn't explain here is that, of course, it only bans plans that would claim to cover what Medicare for All already covers. In other words, fraud. What she's talking about is Section 107, titled Prohibition Against Duplicating Coverage. This section bans health insurance companies or employers from duplicating coverage people would already get from Medicare for All. It also specifically stipulates that there is no such ban on coverage of additional benefits not covered by the Act. Of course, most Americans won't read the bill. They will get the sense from Klobuchar's presentation, though, that they're in danger of losing something. This may seem deceitful or underhanded for Klobuchar to do, but it's not her responsibility to include all the facts in her statement that go against her argument. She told the truth about the bill and presented it in the scariest way possible. That's really what she should do, given her position on healthcare. And given that she's often been too timid to take on another candidate directly, I found it refreshing that she made a clear, direct challenge this time around. Overall, Klobuchar had a better debate this time around than ever before, which will probably improve her favorability and might give her a slight boost in the polls. It was a win for her, I'd say, but don't go too ham on this one. She's still a low-polling candidate, and that's not likely to change from the small improvements she's made. She still has many performance faults, not least of which was her repeated use of weak catchphrases and overwrought cliches.
I believe that what unites us up here, the 10 of us, is much stronger than what divides us. I don't think that's a bold idea. I think it's a bad idea. I want to remind people here that what unites us is so much bigger than what divides us. Houston, we have a problem. He is treating our farmers and our workers like poker chips in one of his bankrupt casinos. And a house divided cannot stand.
Someone who really didn't change up her game much at all was Elizabeth Warren. Here are some of the arguments she brought to the healthcare section of this debate.
Will middle-class taxes go up?
What families have to deal with is cost, total cost. Families are paying every time they don't get a prescription filled because they can't pay for it. They don't have a lump checked out because they can't afford the copay. I've actually never met anybody who likes their health insurance company. Insurance companies last year sucked $23 billion in profits. Every one of those $23 billion was made by an insurance company saying no to your health care coverage.
Mayor Buttigieg.
Given the faults that Biden and Bernie brought to the stage and the fact that she's done well in previous debates, Warren repeating her typical performance was a good thing. Here's her railing against corruption and multinational corporations.
When we've got this much support across the country, 90% of Americans want to see us do background checks, want to get assault weapons off the streets. Why doesn't it happen? And the answer is corruption, pure and simple. Our trade policy in America has been broken for decades, and it has been broken because it works for giant multinational corporations and not for much of anyone else.
She also got to share a bit about her personal story, which I think many would find inspiring.
I wanted to be a public school teacher. By the time I graduated from high school, my family didn't have money for a college application, much less to send me off to 4 years at a university.
One detail Warren didn't mention here is that her dad was actually a janitor, something she could probably make more hay out of. At any rate, with a solid performance, Warren seemed to score a win at the third Democratic debate. Similar to Warren, Cory Booker had a strong performance in the second debate. And I said in my predictions video that all he needed to do to secure a win in this debate is to repeat that performance. Well, that's pretty much what Booker did. Projecting confidence and energy, Booker had several strong lines on issues surrounding criminal justice reform.
We have more African Americans under criminal supervision today than all the slaves in 1850. I joined together and led in the United States Senate the only major bipartisan bill passed under this president for criminal justice reform. We have a criminal justice system that Brian Stevenson says treats you better if you're rich and guilty than if you're poor and innocent.
Mm-hmm. He also spoke eloquently on another issue of importance to his community.
We are never going to solve this crisis if we have to wait for it to personally affect us or our neighborhood or our community before we demand action. Because I have seen what the carnage creates in communities like mine, because we forget the majority of the homicide victims come from neighborhoods like mine. Nobody has ascended to the White House that will bring more personal passion on this issue.
He even portrayed himself as a guy who could take on the political establishment.
With a bunch of tenant leaders in Newark, New Jersey in 2002, took on the political machine, and boy, did they fight back. I had tires on my car slashed, our campaign offices were broken into, my phones were tapped.
Now, this may ring a little hollow to highly informed voters who are aware of the major money that he's received in the past from big pharma and Wall Street firms. But he might skate by with it with most voters, at least until he becomes a top contender in the primary. Overall, Booker might have done more for himself with a strong moment of confrontation with another candidate, but his general confidence and energy on stage will have probably done more good than harm for his campaign. I count this as a win for Booker. Pete Buttigieg also took a fairly non-confrontational approach to the debate. His most aggressive moment came when he took on aggression and got chewed out by Julian Castro. While I personally enjoyed Castro in that moment, I expect that most older voters would side with Pete. Championing civility might draw eye rolls from some, but I think that more voters are likely to find Pete's appeal to be appealing. Pete also came to the debate with plenty of sharp lines.
The only people, though, who actually buy into this president's hateful rhetoric around immigrants are people who don't know any. We saw it at the G7, the leaders of some of the greatest powers and economies of the world sitting to talk about one of the greatest challenges in the world, climate change, and there was literally an empty chair where American leadership could have been. Step one is appoint a Secretary of Education who actually believes in public education. It's not enough to just take a racist policy, replace it with a neutral one, and expect things will just get better on their own. Harms compound. In the same way that $1 saved compound, so does $1 stolen.
Dealing with systemic racism, a tough challenge for Pete given what's happened in South Bend over the summer, Buttigieg made a bold claim about his platform.
Everything from housing to education to health to employment basically puts us in two different countries. I have proposed the most comprehensive vision to tackle systemic racism in every one of these areas.
So Pete's website contains an exhaustive page about plans relating to racial inequality. While it's hard to actually measure whose plan is most comprehensive, I think a lot of voters hearing him say that will intuit that what he's saying is that he's going to do more for black people than any other candidate. That interpretation would be highly misleading. Looking at just the dollars and cents, Pete's proposal for this policy area includes $25 billion for historically black colleges and universities, $10 billion within 5 years for an entrepreneurship fund, and a reallocation of federal contracts which would translate into infusing around $100 billion to underserved communities, which I assume means not just black communities, but let's just count it as all going to black communities for the sake of argument. Okay, so altogether that amounts to a pledge of $135 billion invested into black communities. How does that stack up to other candidates? Well, I decided to just look into one other candidate who is generally not taken too seriously, but who I know wants to do a lot for the black community and has put a number to it. Marianne Williamson's reparations plan claims a Williamson administration would provide reparations in the amount of $200 to $500 billion. These payments will be made to a reparations council made up of black leaders across the spectrum of American academic, cultural, and political leaders. This council, not the American government, would determine how the money is to be dispersed. So literally the first and only candidate I checked against Buttigieg's claim would give more to black communities than Buttigieg. But I think the mayor framed this issue just right. By saying he has the most comprehensive plan, the low-information voters who would interpret this as meaning that he'll do the most about it are not likely to do a cross-comparison with other candidates. High-information voters who might actually look into this issue would probably not get that upset about it, since he actually didn't say that he would do the most or spend the most in this area, just that his plan was the most comprehensive. Again, it's hard to pin down whose plan is the most complete, so he'll skate by with this one. Buttigieg was also one of the more effective candidates when it came to creating an emotionally resonating moment, talking about what it was like to be gay in the military and in Indiana under Mike Pence.
I was a military officer serving under Don't Ask, Don't Tell, and as an elected official in the state of Indiana when Mike Pence was governor.
He then retold his coming out story and ended with the inspirational message he took from voters re-electing him, despite the fact that his town was generally socially conservative.
What happened was that when I trusted voters to judge me based on the job that I did for them, they decided to trust me and re-elected me with 80% of the vote.
All in, this was a win for Buttigieg. A win also supported by how he started the night, playing a joke off a possible misstep by Andrew Yang. Now, Andrew Yang entered the debate with more energy and more confidence than I've ever seen from him, at least on a debate stage.
In America today, everything revolves around the almighty dollar.
Then this happened.
My campaign will now give a freedom dividend of $1,000 a month for an entire year to 10 American families, someone watching this at home right now. If you believe that you can solve your own problems better than any politician, go to yang2020.com and tell us how $1,000 a month will help you do just that.
Okay, I'm going to dig into this in a second, but first let me just show you Pete's reaction, which I think scored him some points.
It's original, I'll give you that.
Okay, back to Yang. Was his pledge to give his $1,000 a month to 10 people a good idea? And will it hurt him or help him? Well, as an idea, I think it's tacky and cheesy. There's also something about it that just doesn't sit right with me. Yang's campaign is fueled primarily by the grassroots, ordinary people giving him their hard-earned cash so he can appear in the debates and build the ground game he needs to win over voters in the primary election. They gave him the money because they thought he needed it to run his campaign, not to fund some kind of lottery. People donated to Yang, I believe, because they think every American deserves $1,000 a month as a right of citizenship. Every American. Not 10 people because they won a sweepstakes contest on his website. Look, Sanders is presently my favorite candidate. I'd be pretty bummed out to see him spend his campaign dollars to give a year of Medicare for all to a select group of lucky patients. The point of establishing something as a right of citizenship is to remove chance and arbitrary fortune from something that you believe ought to be fundamental and universal. Now, all that said, the contest does have an upside. People will enter that contest. People will talk about that contest. It's well designed to raise awareness for Andrew Yang, which is exactly the point. So while he undermines the seriousness of his message with this move, he does increase the chance that it will spread. The mixed bag that Yang's opening statement was exemplified much of his performance throughout the night. While, like usual, Yang spoke less than anyone else on stage, he gave a creative and near perfect answer to a question on healthcare.
I know that our current healthcare system makes it harder to hire people, makes it harder to give them benefits and treat them as full-time employees. You instead pretend they're contractors. It's harder to change jobs. It's certainly harder to start a business. The pitch we have to make to the American people is we will get the healthcare weight off of your backs and then unleash the hopes and dreams of the American people.
Now that was an excellent point. Medicare for all is not just good in itself. He makes a convincing argument that it would be good for small business and the economy. He should stop right there. But of course, he did not.
Senator Booker.
Now, I am Asian, so I know a lot of doctors.
I get that Yang likes to make jokes about being Asian, but this one did not land. Still, Yang did a lot of good for himself on stage. One thing I had suggested he should do in this debate is to bring up some of his other policies aside from UBI, like the campaign finance reforms he suggested on his website. Well, Yang did not disappoint and gave a strong pitch for his democracy dollars proposal.
Our government has been overrun by money and corporate interests. Money finds a way. Money will find its way back in. The answer is to wash the money out with people-powered money. My proposal is that we give every American 100 democracy dollars that you can only give to candidates and causes that you like. This would wash out the lobbyist cash by a factor of 8 to 1. There's the people on one side and the money on the other. The only way for us to win is if we bring them together.
This was a strong move for Yang to make. His original solution for campaign finance reform is easy to understand and tackles an issue of growing concern for many Americans, particularly Democrats and younger voters. While I don't like his UBI sweepstakes idea, that is sure to get him more attention, and his democracy dollars idea will help to prove that he's more than a single issue candidate. There's plenty to criticize about Yang's performance, but for a candidate who is still struggling to get serious mainstream media coverage, I think he did more to help his campaign than to harm it. This was a win for Andrew Yang. Just the opposite of Andrew Yang is Kamala Harris, a candidate who has enjoyed no shortage of hype in the mainstream media or villainization online. Harris has been suffering in the polls, and I predicted a major attempt at a comeback. I could not have been more wrong. Now, in the final moments of the debate, Kamala did have a strong moment, speaking about her mother.
I was raised by a mother who said many things that were life lessons for me, including, don't you ever let anybody tell you who you are. You tell them who you are.
Unfortunately for Kamala, that only came after nearly 3 hours of complete weak sauce.
In recent days, former Vice President Biden has said there's no constitutional authority to issue that executive order when they say, I'm going to eliminate assault weapons. Does the Vice President have a point there?
Well, I mean, I would just say, hey, Joe.
Okay, so she sounds inebriated.
Instead of saying, no, we can't, let's say, yes, we can.
That is not a funny joke, but at least one person loved it.
Let's be constitutional. We got a constitution.
Yes, we can.
Harris found her own joke very funny. But Kamala made herself laugh plenty of times throughout the debate. For instance, when speaking about Trump on trade, she made this fresh reference.
Donald Trump, in office on trade policy, you know, he reminds me of that guy in The Wizard of Oz. You know, when you pull back the curtain, it's a really small dude.
Somehow this got the whole crowd laughing and at least one moderator.
Okay. I'm not even going to take the bait, Senator Harris, but I am going to take this to Senator.
They're not done laughing yet.
It wasn't about you.
I'm going to take this to Senator Sanders right now.
There is a reason why.
But at least one moderator was not having it. Dressed in all white like Tulsi in debate 2, Lindsey Davis came hard after Kamala Harris.
Senator Harris, you released your plan for that just this week, and it does contradict some of your prior positions. Among them, you used to oppose the legalization of marijuana, now you don't. You used to oppose outside investigations of police shootings, now you don't. You've said that you changed on these and other things because you were, quote, swimming against the current, and thankfully the currents have changed. But when you had the power, why didn't you try to effect change then?
Harris answered with a laundry list of changes she wants to make on criminal justice, which included one particular item of interest.
Ending mass incarceration, about taking the profit out of the criminal justice system. I plan on shutting down for-profit prisons on day one. It will be about what we need to do to hold law enforcement, including prosecutors, accountable.
Holding prosecutors accountable. That pretty much characterizes the majority of the conversation that's been hurting Kamala in the polls, holding the prosecutor accountable for her previous statements and actions. Kamala Harris has been tanking in the polls, and I expected her political instincts to push her into doing something bold on stage. Again, I was way off. Harris was weak, giggly, and otherwise boring the whole night through. In my view, she was the most unambiguous loser of this debate. At the onset of this primary race, I expected Kamala Harris to be one of the most dangerous establishment opponents for candidates like Bernie Sanders and Elizabeth Warren. Now, for 2 debates in a row, she's suffered a major loss. The prosecutor may be nosediving out of contention much sooner than I expected. The exact opposite story is unfolding for Beto O'Rourke, the once popular it kid who made a name for himself in his contentious Senate race against Ted Cruz. Beto has been falling in the polls practically since he declared his candidacy, and it looked very much like his 15 minutes of fame were coming to an end. But during this debate, Beto breathed new life into his campaign. It didn't hurt him that he received praise from Joe Biden.
The way Beto handled, excuse me for saying Beto, what Congressman...
That's all right. That does good.
Why wouldn't he want to be called what he calls himself?
The way he handled what happened in his hometown is meaningful. To look in the eyes of those people, to see those kids, to understand those parents.
So Beto clearly got some applause there, but the biggest applause break throughout the debate came after Beto made a very strong stand on firearms.
And in Odessa, I met the mother of a 15-year-old girl, and that mother watched her bleed to death over the course of an hour because so many other people were shot by that AR-15 in Odessa and Midland. There weren't enough ambulances to get to them in time. Hell yes, we're going to take your AR-15, your AK-47. We're not going to allow it to be used against our fellow Americans anymore.
Now, in the past, I've mocked Beto for dramatically saying basically nothing, building up energy and expectations without really saying anything of import to the people of this country. But actually, his speech patterns finally aligned with the substance of what he was saying in this debate, most especially when he talked about the deep-seated systemic racial injustice in America.
We can mark the creation of this country not at the 4th of July, 1776, but August 20th, 1619, when the first kidnapped African was brought to this country against his will and in bondage and as a slave, built the greatness and the success and the wealth that neither he nor his descendants would ever be able to fully participate in and enjoy. We have to be able to answer this challenge, and it is found in our education system, where in Texas, a 5-year-old child in kindergarten is 5 times as likely to be disciplined or suspended or expelled based on the color of their skin. In our healthcare system, where there's a maternal mortality crisis 3 times as deadly for women of color, or the fact that there's 10 times the wealth in white America than there is in black America. I'm going to sign into law a reparations bill that will allow us to address this at its foundations. But we will also call out the fact that we have a white supremacist in the White House, and he poses a mortal threat to people of color all across this country.
There, he did it. Beto finally said something as important as the manner in which he was saying it. Beto performed unambiguously well in the face of ever-lowering expectations. Whether he'll be able to retain this rhythm going forward is yet to be seen, but for this debate, Beto was a clear winner. So, for the third Democratic debate, Beto appeared to be the biggest winner, with Elizabeth Warren, Cory Booker, Pete Buttigieg, Amy Klobuchar, and Andrew Yang also squeaking out wins. Kamala Harris was the biggest loser. Also failing to earn a W were Joe Biden, Bernie Sanders, and Julian Castro. But let's not get too ahead of ourselves. This debate did not include a serious takedown of a major candidate. Despite the relatively poor performances of Sanders and Biden in this debate, they'll both remain among the top 3 polling candidates in this race. And despite the surprisingly good performance of Beto, he's not likely to break into the top 5 with this appearance alone. Polling between 2 and 3%, he's still got a long way to go. Harris, already on the decline, may steepen her fall with this night's loss, but I wouldn't exactly call that a game changer. Since mid-July, we've seen Warren breaking away from the rest of the pack, forming a 3-way race for first place with Bernie Sanders and Joe Biden. We're seeing these 3 candidates become the ones that really matter, while the rest struggle to maintain relevance. If that's the picture, the performances of candidates during the third debate are not likely to change it. So on a macro level, I'd have to say it won't. In response to the question, how will this affect the election?